There are moments in global economics when the world shifts quietly, so quietly that most people don't even realize history has changed direction. March 15, 2023, was one of those moments. On that day, Saudi Arabia announced that it would begin accepting China's yuan for oil shipments to Beijing. Not the dollar, the yuan. For the first time in nearly half a century, the world's most influential oil exporter agreed to price its most valuable commodity in a currency other than the US dollar. A pillar of the 1974 Petrodollar arrangement cracked, and although the headlines barely noticed, the financial world felt the tremor. This wasn't a routine trade adjustment. It was the unmistakable signal that the dollar had entered stage 6 of an 8-stage collapse cycle, the same pattern that dismantled every global reserve currency of the past 500 years. The Portuguese real, the Dutch guilder, the British pound, each enjoyed its period of dominance, each believed its reign would last, and each collapsed following the same sequence. And now the dollar is walking the same path step for step. What most people never understand is that reserve currency status is not permanent. It's a cycle, an empire's economic lifespan, typically lasting between 80 and 110 years. A currency rises, dominates, overreaches, alternatives emerge, confidence breaks, and eventually the world moves on. The United States is now deep into this timeline, and history suggests that 10 to 15 years remain before the dollar loses its status as the world's primary reserve, not disappears but ceases to dominate. And when that happens, the consequences are immense. The US will no longer be able to print money freely and push inflation outward. The $36 trillion national debt becomes impossible to sustain. Borrowing costs explode. The American lifestyle, elevated for decades by the dollar's privilege, contracts sharply. To understand why, we have to walk through the collapse cycle itself. Not speculation, pattern recognition. And the pattern begins with Stage 1, dominance through economic and military superiority. Every reserve currency begins with overwhelming strength. The Portuguese real became the currency of Asian trade because Portugal controlled the sea routes to India and the East Indies in the 1500s. Spices were worth more than gold, and Portuguese naval power guarded the ports, Goa, Malacca, Macau, that made that trade possible. Merchants needed reals to participate, so the currency became the default instrument of international commerce. A century later, the Dutch repeated the model. The Dutch Republic built the most efficient economy in Europe, Amsterdam became the world's financial capital, and the Dutch East India Company, the richest corporation in human history, dominated global shipping. The guilder became trusted because Dutch finance was unrivaled. After defeating Napoleon, Britain inherited global dominance. The pound became the world's reserve money because the Royal Navy controlled the seas, British industry powered global trade, and the gold standard made the pound as good as gold. And in 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement crowned the US dollar as the new global reserve. America held most of the world's gold, produced half of global GDP, and possessed unmatched military power. Even after gold convertibility ended in 1971, the 1974 petrodollar system kept the dollar locked in place. Stage 1 is the rise to absolute dominance, but embedded within that rise is the beginning of the end. Stage 2, peak power and overextension. Every empire eventually stretches itself too far. Portugal attempted to police dozens of ports across Africa and Asia despite having a tiny population. The strain created unsustainable debt. The Dutch fought costly wars with England and France, draining a merchant economy never designed for land warfare. Britain overspent to maintain the world's largest navy while rivals industrialized. And the United States poured trillions into Vietnam, the Cold War, and Middle Eastern conflicts while continuing to expand social programs and accumulate unprecedented debt. During Stage 2, the currency remains strong, not because fundamentals are strong, but because inertia keeps the world dependent. Everyone continues using the dominant currency simply because there is no widely adopted alternative yet. This is the moment when a dominant empire believes it is invincible, right before the decline becomes unavoidable. Stage 3, competitors emerge and build alternatives as the dominant power overreaches. Rivals quietly prepare the groundwork for a new system. Spain and the Netherlands challenged Portugal with their own trading companies. Britain built a superior financial system that slowly overtook Amsterdam. The United States emerged after World War I with a new central bank, deep capital markets, and a booming industrial base, ultimately eclipsing the pound. Today we're seeing the same dynamic unfold. China built the CIPS payment network. Russia built SPF. BRICS nations are constructing a parallel trade and finance ecosystem. None of these systems were designed to overthrow the dollar overnight, only to provide protection if the United States used its financial power too aggressively. And that moment arrived. Stage 4, weaponization backfires and accelerates de-dollarization. This is the turning point. As the dominant power feels pressure, it begins using its currency as a weapon, sanctions, asset freezes, and exclusion from payment networks. And every time this happens, it unintentionally accelerates the global shift away from its currency. Portugal seized rival trading ships. Competitors responded by building new ports and routes. Britain blockaded Dutch trade. Merchants moved their banking operations to London. Britain's freezing of German assets during World War I shattered global trust in the pound. The United States repeated this pattern. In 2014, sanctions pushed Russia to dump dollars and stockpile gold. In 2022, the US froze $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves. This was the largest financial freeze in history, and it terrified every non-Western nation. If reserves held in dollars can be seized, then the dollar is not a neutral global asset. It is political. The result was predictable. China reduced US Treasury holdings. Saudi Arabia diversified its reserves. Central banks bought more gold in 3 years than in any period since the 1970s. Weaponization, meant to reinforce dominance, instead accelerated the creation of alternatives. Stage 5, confidence breaks and reserve share declines. Once trust begins to erode, the decline becomes visible in global reserve data. Portugal's real lost dominance gradually, then suddenly. The guilder fell from 40% of European reserves to near zero in a few decades. The pound dropped from 60% to secondary status within one generation after World War I. The dollar is now following that same arc. Its reserve share peaked at 71% in 1999. By 2024, it had fallen to 58%. The decline is slow, steady, and accelerating, exactly how Stage 5 unfolds in every historical case. Once this stage begins, history is clear. There is no reversal. Confidence does not return. The world does not go back. Stage 5 marks the beginning of the endgame. Stage 6, when alternatives reach critical mass and the world quietly flips. Stage 6 is the moment every empire fears. The phase where alternatives stop being options and become competitors, where the global financial current changes direction and the dominant currency begins losing the very advantage that once made it untouchable. Up to this stage, the world relies on the leading currency out of habit, out of convenience, out of sheer momentum. But once alternatives mature, once new systems become wide enough and trusted enough, the network effect that once protected the dominant currency turns against it. This is where the real danger begins. Not with collapse but with choice. History shows this flip with brutal clarity. By the early 1600s, Dutch and English trading networks had outgrown Portugal's aging empire. Their fleets were faster, their financing more sophisticated, their shipping lanes safer. Merchants no longer preferred Portuguese reals because they had to. They preferred Dutch guilders because they worked better. The moment traders realized they could move more goods, access more credit, and reach more markets using guilders instead of reals, the shift became irreversible. The same pattern crushed Amsterdam after Napoleon. Once London offered deeper financial markets, stronger military backing, and more reliable institutions, merchants migrated naturally toward the pound. The guilder didn't collapse overnight. It simply became less useful, and less useful is the death sentence of every reserve currency. Britain learned this lesson again in the 20th century. World War II broke its economy, but Suez broke its illusion of dominance. When the United States threatened the pound in 1956 and London backed down, the world understood instantly. The network had flipped, the dollar was now the financial center of gravity. And today we are watching the same shift unfold for the dollar itself. Stage 7, crisis acceleration and panic diversification. Every reserve currency collapse reaches a moment when events stop unfolding gradually and begin happening all at once. A war, a financial shock, a policy mistake, something snaps the system's shallow confidence, and countries rush for the exits. Portugal's collapse was sealed by the War of Spanish Succession. Blockades choked its sea routes. Asia was lost entirely. The real became worthless outside Lisbon within a generation. For the Dutch, Napoleon delivered the fatal blow. Amsterdam's ports were cut off, colonies severed, and its once dominant financial system simply evaporated. For Britain, World War II was the reckoning. The empire spent everything to defeat Germany, emerging victorious but bankrupt. By 1949 the pound was devalued by 30%, and after Suez, its political authority was gone. The pound fell from global reserve to regional currency in just 15 years. The dollar's stage 7 trigger hasn't happened yet, but several pressures are building toward that breaking point. A successful BRICS currency launch could create the first credible alternative for commodity pricing since the 1970s. A U.S. debt crisis, with interest payments already exceeding $1.2 trillion a year, could shake bond markets. A multi-front military overstretch could undermine global credibility. A commercial real estate meltdown could trigger a domestic banking crisis. Any one of these could ignite panic diversification. In that scenario, countries dump treasuries, the dollar loses 30–50% of its value in months, and the Federal Reserve faces an impossible choice: raise interest rates sharply and plunge the economy into depression, or print aggressively and trigger inflation. Either path accelerates the collapse. Stage 8, replacement and a new reserve framework. Stage 8 is not the end of the dollar, it is the end of its singular dominance. Every previous reserve currency faded gradually while a new system rose beside it. The guilder replaced the real long before Portugal officially fell. The pound overtook the guilder slowly, then decisively. The dollar became supreme after Bretton Woods, but it took nearly 2 decades before sterling truly lost its international relevance. The post-dollar landscape has 3 realistic possibilities. 1. The Chinese yuan. If China continues expanding its economy and CIPS becomes the preferred settlement network, the yuan could take the lead. But its capital controls and political opacity remain major obstacles. 2. A multipolar system. Euro, yuan, dollar, each dominant in different regions. Global trade becomes diversified rather than centralized for the first time in modern history. 3. A gold-anchored BRICS currency. If BRICS launches a commodity-backed unit that is truly neutral, it could become a stabilizing global alternative, similar to the gold exchange standard of the early 20th century. Which system wins will depend on trust, liquidity, and geopolitical stability, the same forces that shaped every transition in the past. Why the petrodollar's decline is faster than past transitions. Previous reserve currency shifts took 30 to 50 years. This one will be faster, likely 20 to 30, because 5 unprecedented accelerators exist today. 1. Instant digital transactions. Gold shipments once took weeks. Reserves now move in seconds. De-dollarization can happen overnight. 2. Multiple ready-made alternatives. The dollar replaced the pound because it was the only viable choice. Today, nations can pivot to yuan, euro, gold, or BRICS mechanisms immediately. 3. The petrodollar was political, not economic. It relied on a single relationship: Washington, Riyadh. As Saudi Arabia diversifies, the foundation dissolves instantly. 4. U.S. debt levels are historically extreme. No previous reserve power carried debt remotely close to America's $36 trillion. High debt accelerates crisis dynamics. 5. Globalization amplifies contagion. A dollar crisis would hit every corner of the world instantly due to $80 trillion in dollar-denominated liabilities. When you zoom out and look at the past 500 years, you begin to realize something important. No empire ever believed its currency could fall. Until the moment it did. Portugal thought it would rule the seas forever. The Netherlands believed Amsterdam would remain the world's financial heart. Britain expected the pound to stand eternal. And yet, each one watched its currency fade, not because of a single event but because of a cycle. A cycle as old as global trade itself. A cycle that never once reversed. And now, for the first time in our lifetimes, we are watching that same cycle play out in real time, not in a history book, not in a classroom, but in the headlines of today. Stage by stage. Pattern by pattern. Signal by signal. The dollar's dominance was never permanent. It was a privilege built on strength, trust, and global dependence. But strength fades. Trust erodes. Dependence shifts. And when the world finds alternatives, real, functional, widely adopted alternatives, the gravitational pull of a reserve currency finally breaks. We are not seeing the end of the United States. We are not seeing the end of the dollar. We are witnessing the end of an era, the end of a system that gave America unmatched power for half a century. The next era will not be defined by a single currency rising to the throne, but by a world learning to operate without a singular financial king. A multipolar landscape. Multiple centers of gravity. Trade denominated in whatever currency works best, not whatever currency Washington demands. For the average person, this shift won't feel like a collapse in the sky. It will feel like slow, grinding change, prices rising a little faster, debts becoming a little heavier, jobs shifting, opportunities moving across borders, a world reorganizing itself around new rules. But to those who understand the pattern, those who follow the data, the history, the cycles, it won't be a surprise. It will be an inflection point. A moment to adapt, reposition, and prepare for the architecture of the next global system. Because in every transition there are winners and losers. Those who recognize the shift early rise with the new system. Those who deny it fall with the old one. The dollar era is closing. The post-dollar world is forming. And the question isn't whether the change will come, history has already answered that. The only question now is, where will you stand when the cycle completes?